It had been one of those days where the weight of the world seemed to press down harder than usual. The rain had started in the afternoon, turning the streets into slick mirrors that reflected the gray clouds above. She walked quickly, hugging her coat tightly around her shoulders, trying to escape the cold, but also the feelings that had been building inside her for weeks. Her mind was a swirl of doubts, fears, and memories she couldn't seem to escape. Each step she took echoed the uncertainty that had settled into her life, a constant reminder that nothing seemed right anymore. She had left her apartment that morning feeling numb, not quite knowing where she was going or what she was hoping to find. Some part of her wanted distraction, while another part just wanted to disappear into the rhythm of the city. She wandered through the streets, the sounds of traffic and distant conversations mixing with the steady beat of her own thoughts. The world seemed alive and yet somehow distant, as if she were moving through it while wrapped in a fog. By the time she reached a small bus stop tucked between two buildings, the rain had grown heavier. She stopped under the small shelter, letting the drops hit her hood and shoulders. She wasn't paying much attention to the people around her until a man caught her eye. He was sitting on the bench, a book in his hands, though he wasn't reading. His eyes were fixed on the street ahead, watching the rain fall. There was something about him that seemed calm, grounded, and patient, a quiet contrast to the storm inside her. For a moment she hesitated. She wasn't usually someone who talked to strangers, especially not on days like this, but there was something in his presence that drew her in, something that whispered that it might be okay to step out of her bubble, even just for a little while. She shuffled closer, careful not to seem intrusive, and muttered an awkward greeting. He looked up, and for a moment his eyes met hers. There was a gentle smile there, not forced, just soft and warm. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Ease. The rain continued to fall, and a silence hung between them. Then, almost accidentally, she tripped on the edge of the curb, her coffee spilling onto the pavement. She cursed under her breath, feeling embarrassed and frustrated. Without a word, he stood and offered her his hand. "Here, take my hand," he said simply. She hesitated, unsure, but something in his tone was steady, encouraging, and she found herself reaching out. When her fingers met his, a strange calm washed over her. The small gesture, so ordinary in the world, felt monumental in that moment. For the first time that day, she felt a small spark of hope. They both laughed softly, the tension breaking just a little. She mumbled her thanks, and he shrugged as if it were nothing. But in that simple act of kindness, she felt the beginnings of connection, something she had almost forgotten existed. They began to talk at first about trivial things, the rain, the difficulty of getting home, the chaos of the city. But slowly, their words grew deeper. She found herself sharing more than she intended, letting fragments of her life slip out, fragments of pain, loss, and fear. He listened without judgment, nodding occasionally, offering quiet encouragement. She noticed the way he didn't interrupt, the way he didn't rush her, and it made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt for a long time. There was no pressure, no expectation, just presence. And that presence was enough to make her feel lighter, even if just a little. Minutes passed, though it felt longer. The rain began to ease, turning from a steady downpour to a soft drizzle. She realized that she had been holding her breath, and now she could finally release it. They talked about small things like favorite books, the odd habits people have in the city, and the comfort of a hot drink on a cold day. She laughed more than she had in weeks, and it felt almost foreign to hear the sound of her own laughter, bright and genuine. As the bus approached, she felt a twinge of hesitation. She didn't want the moment to end, didn't want to slip back into the gray haze she had been moving through all day. The man offered her a simple suggestion. "If you want, we could meet again. No pressure, just a walk, maybe a coffee." She paused, considering it. Part of her was terrified of letting someone new into her life, of opening herself up again. But another part, a part that had been quietly hoping for change, nudged her forward. She nodded, a small smile breaking across her face. They exchanged numbers, a mundane but significant ritual that felt like the start of something unknown. The bus arrived and she climbed aboard, her mind buzzing with the encounter. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of excitement, a small curiosity about what could come next. It wasn't much, just a spark, but sparks were enough to ignite hope. Over the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She replayed their conversation, the way he had made her feel comfortable, the way he had simply been there. She realized how starved she had been for genuine connection, for someone who could meet her where she was without judgment. The thought of seeing him again brought a tentative smile to her face, one that felt like the first real smile in a long time. Life hadn't changed drastically overnight. Her problems were still there, the uncertainty still lingered, and the shadows of past fears still whispered in her ear. But something had shifted, a subtle change in her perception of the world. The encounter reminded her that kindness existed, that there were people who could make a difference in unexpected ways. And sometimes that was enough to start walking toward a new life. Even if the path was still unclear, she found herself paying more attention to the small details of her days, the way sunlight streamed through her apartment window, the comforting aroma of coffee brewing in the morning, the simple pleasure of reading a book without distraction. These small things, once overlooked, now felt like tiny anchors, reminders that life could hold gentle moments of joy even in the midst of chaos. Then came the day of their second meeting. She arrived a few minutes early, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He was already there, waiting with the same calm smile that had first drawn her in. They walked together in silence for a while, listening to the city around them, sharing small observations and gradually easing into deeper conversations. They didn't rush, didn't force anything, just allowed the moment to unfold naturally. She found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. Memories she had buried, fears she had hidden even from herself, and hopes she had stopped believing in all surfaced in fragments. And yet he didn't recoil or judge. He listened, offered gentle encouragement, and sometimes just remained silent, a steady presence that reassured her that she wasn't alone. By the end of the walk, her coat damp but her heart strangely lighter, she realized something important. This stranger, this person she had barely known a week ago, had reminded her of something she had forgotten, that trust could exist, that connection could heal, and that even small acts of courage could lead to new beginnings. She had taken his hand once, almost instinctively, and that small gesture had opened a door she hadn't thought she could walk through. The rain had stopped entirely by the time they parted ways, leaving the streets glistening and clean. She watched him disappear into the crowd, feeling a sense of anticipation and calm all at once. For the first time in a long time, she felt like life was no longer just something to endure. It was something to experience, to explore, and perhaps to embrace with a little courage and an open heart. She returned home that evening, her steps lighter than when she had left. She brewed herself a cup of tea, wrapped herself in a warm blanket, and let the memories of the day sink in. Her mind wandered over the conversations, the quiet moments of understanding, and the subtle ways in which her world had begun to shift. She didn't know what the future held, or how much this connection would grow, but she knew one thing: she had taken a small risk, reached for a hand, and in doing so had taken the first step toward a new life. And sometimes that first step was the most important of all. The days that followed were filled with a quiet anticipation. She found herself looking forward to small moments in ways she hadn't before, even though the world around her remained unchanged. The rain still fell, people still rushed past on busy streets, and life kept moving with its usual mix of chaos and order. But her mind had shifted, and that shift made even ordinary days feel new. The thought of seeing him again brought a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense that something good might be waiting if she allowed herself to reach for it. Their second meeting was arranged for a weekend afternoon. She arrived at the small park near the river a little early, letting herself watch the water ripple and sparkle in the afternoon light. It was a quiet corner of the city, a place that seemed set apart from the usual rush. She noticed him sitting on a bench, hands resting on his knees, his calm presence as reassuring as she remembered. When he looked up and smiled, her chest lifted slightly, and she felt the familiar tug of hope. They walked together along the riverbank, neither in a hurry, talking about small things first: weather, the changing leaves, the way sunlight danced on the water. Gradually, the conversation shifted to more personal topics. She shared stories of her childhood, the things that had shaped her, and the struggles she had faced in recent months. She was, surprised at how easily the words came, as if speaking aloud made her burdens lighter. He listened carefully, nodding, sometimes offering a small comment, but mostly giving her space to speak. It was rare to feel so heard, to have someone's attention given without judgment or interruption. As the afternoon passed, they discovered shared interests: books, music, and even simple hobbies like taking photographs of quiet corners of the city. They laughed together at little coincidences and awkward moments, and she began to notice a lightness in her step that hadn't been there before. Her fears hadn't vanished, but they felt less overwhelming. Talking to him reminded her that she wasn't as alone as she had thought. During one part of their walk, they stumbled across a small street market. The air was filled with the scent of fresh bread and roasted nuts. Colorful stalls lined the narrow street, and the hum of conversation created a warm background. She wandered between the stalls, picking up little things: a hand-painted bookmark, a small pot for a plant. He followed, occasionally making a joke or pointing out something interesting. There was a comfort in his company, a feeling that she could simply exist without having to perform or hide her fears. At one stall, she picked up a small notebook with blank pages. She hadn't intended to buy it, but something about the simplicity called to her. He noticed and asked if she wrote, and she admitted she had once but had stopped over time. He encouraged her gently, saying that sometimes the best way to find clarity was to write down what she felt. She smiled at the suggestion, realizing how small acts of encouragement could plant seeds of change. As the sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges, they found a quiet spot on the riverbank. She sat down on a large stone, feeling the cool surface beneath her hands. He sat beside her, and for a moment, they simply watched the water move. No words were needed. In the silence, she realized how much she had missed having someone to share a simple moment with. Someone who didn't ask for anything but offered presence and understanding. Over the next few weeks, their meetings became more frequent. They explored different parts of the city together, each outing simple yet meaningful: a stroll through an art exhibit, a walk in the park, or sitting in a quiet cafe talking for hours. She began to notice changes in herself. She laughed more, even at her own awkward mistakes. She felt a spark of curiosity about life again, and the sense of heaviness she had carried seemed to lift, if only slightly. Her friends began to notice the difference too. She spoke with more energy, her voice lighter, her eyes brighter. She didn't talk about him much, but they could see the subtle shift in her demeanor. She hadn't realized how much her isolation had been weighing on her until she felt the contrast of connection and trust. It was a delicate balance. She wanted to remain cautious, yet she found herself looking forward to the moments when she could share parts of herself she had hidden for so long. One day, while walking through a narrow street lined with old brick buildings, she tripped over a loose stone. He caught her arm before she fell, steadying her with ease. The simple act of support made her heart pound, not in fear, but in the awareness that someone else cared enough to be there. She laughed nervously, brushing off her coat, and he smiled, shaking his head. "You have to be more careful," he said gently but without judgment. She realized that he wasn't there to control her or fix her, but to walk alongside her, offering support when she needed it. She began to trust herself more as well. The confidence she gained in small ways started to spill into other parts of her life. She applied for a job she had been hesitant about, spoke up in meetings, and reached out to friends she had avoided. Each step was small yet significant. She understood that trust wasn't just about other people. It was about trusting herself, trusting her instincts, and allowing herself to take risks, even if they scared her. One afternoon, they sat in a quiet cafe, the warm light spilling through the windows. She told him about a dream she had, one she had kept to herself because it felt impossible. He listened intently, asking questions and encouraging her to imagine what it would take to make it real. She left the cafe that day with a notebook filled with ideas, sketches, and thoughts she hadn't allowed herself to explore before. It felt like she was beginning to carve a path for herself, one small step at a time. Throughout all of this, the bond between them remained gentle, without pressure or expectation. There was no rush to define what they were, no need to label anything. The simplicity of their connection was what made it strong, the understanding that they were two people supporting each other through the uncertainties of life. And in that understanding, she found comfort, courage, and a sense of belonging she had almost forgotten. One evening, after a long walk through a neighborhood filled with twinkling lights, they sat on a low wall, watching the city come alive at night. She spoke quietly about her fears, the doubts that still lingered, and the past mistakes that haunted her. He didn't offer solutions, didn't tell her what to do. He simply listened, and when she finished, he said, "You're stronger than you know, and you're not alone." Those words stayed with her, echoing in her mind as she walked home that night. She realized that the stranger who had once offered her his hand on a rainy day had become a guide of sorts, not leading her by the hand, but walking beside her, showing her that life could be faced with courage and hope. It wasn't that he fixed her or solved her problems. It was that he reminded her of her own strength, her own ability to choose, to risk, and to move forward. As the days turned into weeks, she continued to take small steps in her life. The routines she once found mundane now held a sense of purpose. She explored new hobbies, reconnected with people she had lost touch with, and began to see herself in a new light. Each time she faced a challenge, she remembered the calm presence beside her, and it gave her the courage to keep moving. The connection between them grew, not in grand gestures, but in the accumulation of small moments, shared walks, quiet conversations, laughter, and mutual support. It was in these moments that she discovered the beauty of human connection, the way it could gently shape a person's life, giving them the courage to dream, to try, and to embrace the unknown. By the end of part 2, she understood that life could change slowly, quietly, in ways that were almost imperceptible. She had learned that taking a chance on trust, even with a stranger, could open doors she had long kept closed. And with each step, each shared smile, each small act of kindness, she was moving closer to a new life, one filled with hope, courage, and the quiet joy of connection. Life began to feel a little less heavy as the days went on. She had started to notice changes in herself that she hadn't recognized before. Small shifts, like waking up earlier with a sense of purpose, or feeling calmer in situations that used to terrify her, reminded her that change didn't always come in big bursts. Sometimes it arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly, carried on moments of trust and acts of courage, and the stranger who had once offered her a hand on a rainy evening was a constant presence in these changes. One morning, she received a message from him suggesting a walk in a part of the city she had never explored. The sun was warm, the air fresh, and there was a lightness in her step she hadn't felt in months. They wandered through narrow streets, admiring the small murals painted on brick walls, stopping occasionally to examine a sculpture or a shop window. Conversation flowed naturally, covering everything from books to small life struggles, laughter mixing with reflective silence. She realized how comfortable she had become with him, how easy it was to share her thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment. During their walk, she noticed a small community center tucked behind a row of trees. Curiosity sparked. She suggested they peek inside. The building was quiet, filled with people engaged in painting, reading, and casual conversation. Something about the atmosphere felt inviting. They stayed for a while, wandering through the rooms, observing the creative energy of those inside. She found herself thinking about her own dreams, the ones she had tucked away, believing they were too far out of reach. Later that afternoon, as they sat on a bench outside, he asked gently about what she wanted for her future. She hesitated, unsure how to answer. Her life had been so uncertain, so shaped by caution and fear, that imagining a different path felt both thrilling and terrifying. He listened as she stumbled through her thoughts, never pressuring, only offering support. By the end of the conversation, she felt a small spark of determination, a recognition that perhaps she could take steps toward her dreams. In the following weeks, she began making subtle changes in her routine. She started journaling every morning, using the notebook he had encouraged her to buy, filling pages with thoughts, sketches, and plans. Writing allowed her to untangle her worries and fears, to see patterns, and to imagine solutions. It was slow work, but each word she wrote strengthened her resolve. And when she felt unsure, she would remember his words, the calm presence, the trust he had offered, and it reminded her that she didn't have to face her fears alone. One rainy evening, she found herself at a crossroads. She had been offered an opportunity that could change her career, something she had wanted for years, but had been hesitant to pursue. The thought of taking the risk terrified her. She thought about the comfort of staying where she was, the safety of familiar routines, and the uncertainty that came with change. Her heart raced, doubt clouding her mind. But then she remembered the stranger who had offered her a hand, who had shown her that small acts of courage could open new doors. She realized that perhaps it was time to take another step. She called him that evening, her voice shaking slightly. She told him about the opportunity, about her fear, and about the uncertainty that weighed heavily on her. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, and then spoke softly, reminding her of her strengths, her talents, and the resilience she had shown. His words weren't grand or commanding, but they carried a quiet power. She felt encouraged, not because he told her what to do, but because he reminded her that she had the ability to choose, to act, and to face her fears. The next morning, she submitted her application. Her hands shook slightly as she clicked the final button, but there was a strange exhilaration in the act. She had made a choice, faced uncertainty, and taken a risk. And as she did, a sense of empowerment washed over her. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was actively shaping her life, rather than reacting to it. Over the following days, she continued to explore the city with him. Their walks took on a new significance now that she had begun to embrace change in her own life. They discovered quiet bookstores, hidden cafes, and small parks tucked away in forgotten corners. Each outing strengthened her confidence, her curiosity, and her sense of possibility. She noticed herself engaging more with the world, noticing details she had previously overlooked, appreciating moments that had once seemed ordinary. One afternoon, they attended a small art exhibition together. As they wandered through the gallery, she found herself drawn to a painting that spoke to something deep inside her. It was abstract, chaotic yet beautiful, filled with colors and shapes that mirrored her own emotions. She turned to him, surprised to find that he had noticed her fascination. They spoke quietly about the piece, about the feelings it evoked, and she realized that she had never shared such personal reactions with anyone before. And yet he didn't judge or analyze. He simply listened, offering understanding and shared appreciation. In the following weeks, she began taking steps to reconnect with her own passions. She signed up for a class she had once wanted to take, explored creative hobbies, and allowed herself to experiment without fear of failure. With each small action, she felt her confidence grow, the sense of stagnation that had weighed her down slowly lifting. And throughout it all, he remained a steady presence, not leading, not pushing, simply walking beside her as she discovered her own strength. Then came a day when she faced another test of courage. She had to confront a personal issue she had avoided for years, a strained relationship, a past regret, or a missed opportunity that still haunted her. The thought of addressing it filled her with anxiety. But she remembered the lessons she had learned, the quiet courage she had begun to nurture, and the reassurance that she didn't have to face it alone. She reached out, took action, and confronted the situation with honesty and openness. It wasn't easy, and the outcome wasn't perfect, but it was transformative. She felt lighter, freer, and more in control of her life than she had in years. As the days turned into months, her life gradually shifted. She experienced setbacks, of course, moments of doubt, fear, and frustration, but she had developed tools to navigate them. She wrote, she reflected, she sought support when needed, and she leaned on the lessons she had learned from her connection with him. And in this process, she discovered the importance of patience, resilience, and self-compassion. One evening, as they walked along a familiar street lined with glowing streetlights, she paused to take in the scene. The city, once overwhelming and chaotic, now felt familiar and comforting. She turned to him, a small smile playing on her lips, and realized that her journey was no longer just about survival. It was about growth, exploration, and embracing life with all its uncertainties. She had begun to step fully into her own story, and he had been there offering support without expectation, reminding her of her own strength. By the end of part 3, she understood that life was a series of choices, each small act of courage building upon the last. She had learned that trust could be a powerful catalyst for change, that connection could heal and inspire, and that the simple act of reaching for a hand could set in motion a journey toward self-discovery and fulfillment. And as she looked ahead, she felt a quiet excitement for the next chapter. knowing that the steps she took now would shape the life she was creating for herself. By this point, her life had begun to feel different, not because the world had changed, but because she had changed. The small steps she had taken with his support had opened doors she had long thought were closed. She had started to embrace new experiences, to listen to her own voice, and to trust herself in ways she had never imagined. Each day felt like a small victory, each choice a declaration that she was ready to live fully. One morning, she woke up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She had decided to take a more active role in shaping her life, rather than simply responding to events as they came. She wrote in her notebook, outlining goals, dreams, and even small changes she wanted to make. It wasn't about perfection. It was about action, about creating momentum that would carry her forward. She felt a surge of determination and a sense of control she had long forgotten. Her weekends were now filled with adventures of exploration. She and him wandered through parts of the city she had never seen, discovering hidden streets, small parks, and quiet cafes tucked away from the usual bustle. They talked endlessly, sharing thoughts, dreams, and fears. She found herself opening up more each day, letting her guard down and trusting him in ways she had been afraid to trust anyone. And in return, he shared parts of himself too. Stories of struggles he had faced, lessons he had learned, and moments of vulnerability. Their connection deepened not through grand gestures, but through the simple, steady rhythm of shared life. One afternoon, she found herself standing at the edge of a river she had never visited before. The water shimmered in the sunlight, moving steadily despite the obstacles in its path. She took a deep breath and felt a sense of clarity. Life, like the river, moved forward, carving new paths, creating opportunities and shaping the landscape in ways that were sometimes subtle, but always powerful. She realized that she had the ability to be like that river, to navigate challenges and keep moving forward, even when the path seemed uncertain. She shared these thoughts with him as they walked along the riverbank. He listened, nodding with understanding, never offering judgment, only presence. It was remarkable how such quiet companionship had become so important, how the presence of someone who simply walked beside her could make her feel stronger, braver, and more alive. She had begun to internalize the lessons he had gently offered, that trust could heal, that connection could inspire, and that courage could grow from small, consistent actions. Encouraged by this newfound clarity, she began taking more significant steps in her life. She applied for opportunities she had once considered out of reach, reached out to friends she had lost touch with, and even addressed difficult personal matters she had avoided for years. Each act required courage. Each choice demanded faith in herself. But she was beginning to see that she could handle the challenges, that she had grown stronger than she had realized. One evening, they found themselves in a small art gallery. She wandered through the space, drawn to a painting that felt chaotic yet beautiful, like life itself. She lingered, tracing the colors with her eyes, feeling a resonance with the work. He stood beside her quietly, sharing in the experience without needing to say much. She realized that these moments, quiet, shared, and unhurried, were shaping her just as much as the bigger actions she was taking. The gentle presence of someone who understood her made her feel validated and seen. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of growth and discovery. She started pursuing creative projects she had shelved years ago, experimented with new hobbies, and explored paths that had once seemed impossible. Each attempt, successful or not, built her confidence. She had learned that mistakes were not failures, but steps in the process of learning and growing. And with him walking beside her, she felt supported in every endeavor, encouraged to continue even when doubt crept in. A pivotal moment came when she faced a decision that could significantly alter her life. It involved moving to a new city for a job opportunity, leaving behind the familiar streets, routines, and people she had known for years. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she reminded herself of how far she had come. She remembered the first time she had taken his hand on that rainy evening, and how that small act of courage had set everything else in motion. She realized that the leap she faced now was just another chance to trust herself in the process. She talked through the decision with him, expressing her fears and uncertainties. He listened, offering thoughtful reflections and gentle encouragement. He reminded her that she had the strength to face change, and that moving forward didn't mean she would be alone. She had built resilience, skills, and a sense of self that would guide her through whatever came next. After long consideration, she decided to take the leap. The choice felt terrifying and exhilarating all at once, but it was a choice made from her own power and determination. The days leading up to her move were filled with preparation, reflection, and quiet moments of anticipation. She packed her belongings, said her goodbyes, and allowed herself to feel the mixture of sadness and excitement. She thought about how far she had come, how the small acts of courage she had taken had brought her to this point, and she felt gratitude for the stranger who had offered a hand, for the support he had given, and for the journey she had undertaken. On the day of her departure, he accompanied her to the station. They walked together in comfortable silence, the city around them buzzing with life. She felt a lump in her throat, realizing that this was a turning point. When it was time to say goodbye, he held her hand just as he had months ago. The gesture was simple, yet profoundly meaningful. She squeezed his hand in return, feeling a mixture of emotions: fear, hope, gratitude, and determination. And then she stepped forward, boarding the train, ready to embrace the new chapter that awaited her. The journey itself was reflective. As the city receded into the distance, she thought about the person she had been when she first met him, and the person she had become. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and had taken steps toward a fuller, more intentional life. The connection she had formed had given her courage, inspired her to act, and reminded her of the power of human kindness and trust. And though the future was uncertain, she felt ready to face it, knowing that she carried the lessons she had learned with her. By the time she arrived in the new city, she felt a sense of excitement she hadn't anticipated. The streets were unfamiliar, the routines unformed, but the possibilities felt endless. She checked into her new apartment, unpacked her belongings, and allowed herself to absorb the fresh environment. Each small discovery, a new cafe, a quiet park, a friendly neighbor, added to her sense of belonging and possibility. She began to understand that life was not about avoiding fear, but about moving forward in spite of it. In the weeks that followed, she settled into her new routine. Work was challenging but fulfilling, offering opportunities to learn and grow. She explored the city, seeking out hidden streets, local markets, and peaceful spots to reflect. And throughout it all, she carried the memory of the first stranger who had offered a hand, the quiet presence that had helped her discover her own courage. It was a reminder that small acts of kindness and trust could ripple through life, transforming it in ways one could never predict. Part 4 ends with her standing on the balcony of her new apartment, looking out at the city lights. She takes a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past, the lessons of the present, and the hope for the future. She realizes that she has walked a long way from the person she was, and that she is ready to continue walking, step by step, hand in hand, with courage, trust, and the promise of a life she is beginning to shape for herself. Life in the new city was both exciting and challenging. Every street held something unfamiliar. Every corner presented opportunities to explore. She found herself navigating new routines, learning the rhythm of her surroundings, and discovering places that brought her joy and peace. The initial fear of change had given way to curiosity, and she embraced each day as a chance to create something new. She walked with purpose, but also with an open heart, remembering the lessons of trust and courage that had brought her here. Work was demanding, but it offered her a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known in a long time. She was learning to adapt, to solve problems creatively, and to rely on the skills and confidence she had cultivated in the previous months. Some days were exhausting, others exhilarating, but all contributed to her growing sense of independence. She began to understand that the life she wanted wasn't something that would simply appear. It was something she would create through effort, patience, and resilience. In the midst of this new life, she thought often of him, the stranger who had changed everything. Their conversations, his gentle guidance, and the small acts of support had built a foundation of strength within her. She realized that the courage to take risks and embrace the unknown had come from those early moments when she had chosen to trust. And although they were now separated by distance, the lessons he had imparted remained with her, guiding her choices and shaping her perspective. She began reaching out to others, forming new connections in the city. The loneliness she had once felt was slowly replaced by a sense of community. She joined local groups, attended events, and even volunteered for causes that mattered to her. Each interaction brought a sense of belonging, and she discovered that opening herself to connection, even with strangers, could lead to meaningful relationships. She felt a growing confidence in her ability to navigate life, to take initiative, and to build a support system around her. There were moments of doubt, of course, The unfamiliarity of the city, the pressures of work, and the memories of past failures sometimes weighed heavily. But she had learned to pause, breathe, and reflect. She journaled regularly, noting her achievements, her fears, and the lessons she was learning. This practice helped her maintain clarity, focus, and a sense of purpose. Each entry reinforced the idea that she was capable of growth, capable of handling challenges, and capable of shaping the life she desired. One evening, after a long day of work, she walked along a quiet street lined with glowing lights. The city hummed softly around her, a comforting rhythm that seemed to echo the confidence growing within her. She stopped at a small park, watching children play and neighbors chat, and felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. Life felt balanced, full of challenges, yes, but also full of possibility and beauty. She realized that she had finally found a space where she could breathe, create, and thrive. She also reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the rainy day when she first took a stranger's hand, through the small steps of trust, courage, and self-discovery. She had traveled a long road. Every choice, every risk, and every moment of vulnerability had shaped the person she had become. She understood now that life was not about avoiding fear or difficulty, but about facing them with courage and finding the strength to continue walking forward. In her free time, she explored the city's hidden corners, finding inspiration in art, nature, and the quiet moments of everyday life. She would sit by the river, watch the sunset, and allow herself to reflect on her growth. These moments reminded her of the importance of slowing down, appreciating the present, and recognizing the progress she had made. Life was no longer something to endure. It was something to experience fully, with awareness and gratitude. Her personal growth extended to her relationships as well. She nurtured friendships, learned to communicate more openly, and allowed herself to be vulnerable with others. The fear of rejection or disappointment had less power over her because she had faced greater fears and learned that she could survive, adapt, and thrive. She had learned to set boundaries, to prioritize her well-being, and to seek out people who supported and uplifted her. This sense of self-respect and clarity in relationships contributed to her overall sense of stability and happiness. Occasionally, she would write letters she never sent, reflections on her journey, thoughts about the stranger who had changed her life, and the lessons she had learned along the way. These writings became a source of strength and self-awareness, a record of how far she had come. She realized that her story was unique, shaped by courage, trust, and the willingness to step into the unknown, and she understood that sharing her experiences, even quietly with herself, helped her recognize the power she had to influence her own life. Months passed, and the city that once felt unfamiliar now felt like home. She had carved out spaces that brought her comfort, connected with people who enriched her life, and discovered aspects of herself she hadn't known existed. Her sense of hope and purpose continued to grow, reinforced by the knowledge that she had the tools to navigate challenges and embrace opportunities. Life had become a journey she actively shaped, rather than a series of events she passively endured. She often thought about the moments that had defined her transformation: the rainy day when she reached for a hand, the walks through quiet streets, the conversations that encouraged reflection, and the small acts of courage that built her confidence. Each memory was a reminder that life could change in unexpected ways, and that trust and connection could lead to profound growth. She felt gratitude for the stranger who had been a catalyst for this change, understanding that even brief encounters could leave lasting impacts. On weekends, she explored the city's cultural offerings, attended workshops, and pursued creative projects that fueled her passion. She took time to enjoy the small pleasures: a good meal, a walk in the park, or the simple act of reading a book in the sun. These moments, though seemingly ordinary, reinforced the idea that life's richness often lay in its quiet details. She had learned to slow down, to notice, and to savor experiences that she might once have overlooked. One evening, she stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out at the city lights twinkling below. She reflected on her journey, realizing that she had transformed in ways she could scarcely have imagined months before. Fear had been replaced by courage, isolation by connection, and doubt by a growing sense of confidence. She understood that her life was now something she actively created, a canvas she could shape with intention and care. She thought about the future with a sense of excitement rather than apprehension. There were still unknowns, challenges she hadn't faced, and opportunities waiting to be discovered. But she felt ready, armed with the resilience, trust, and courage she had cultivated. The lessons she had learned about human connection, about vulnerability, and about embracing change would guide her through whatever came next. In quiet moments, she smiled at the memory of that first rainy evening, when a simple act of kindness had altered the course of her life. She had taken a stranger's hand and, in doing so, had chosen to step into a new world of possibilities. That choice had led her to growth, joy, and self-discovery. It was a reminder that life's turning points often came in small, unexpected ways, and that courage and trust could open doors she had once thought were closed. She understood now that her story was one of transformation, not because the world had changed, but because she had changed. The fear and uncertainty that had once defined her life had been replaced by curiosity, resilience, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. She had learned that true growth came from taking risks, from connecting with others, and from trusting herself to navigate the journey. As she turned away from the balcony and settled into her evening, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and fulfillment. Life was still unpredictable, full of challenges and surprises, but she was no longer afraid. She had discovered the strength to face uncertainty, the wisdom to embrace change, and the joy of connection. And in that discovery, she had found a new life, one shaped by courage, trust, and the simple, transformative power of reaching for a hand when it was offered.